The area is a war zone, and therefore it is not safe.
But that's what war journalists do, Lieutenant Colonel. They go into war zones, they report. That's what they've been doing in Ukraine.
This was challenged by the Foreign Press Association against our court, and the courts determined that there is absolutely no need for Israel to permit the access from Israel into the Gaza Strip of journalists. We are working with international partners in order to get aid into Gaza, and I can say even this morning we've conducted humanitarian operations with the World Food Programme, bringing truckloads of food supplies into northern Gaza Strip. So absolutely, we're listening attentively to our allies, and it is part of the war effort. Our war effort is currently focused on two core issues. First of all, preventing Hamas from regrouping, and that is precisely what you mentioned there. The operations being conducted this morning in the area of Jabalia, as well as in the area of Zaytun, are areas where we've identified that Hamas is trying to regroup and reorganize and conduct further offensives against Israel. That's something we can't allow. We can't allow Hamas to continue to threaten Israel. And the second component, of course, is the limited in scope operations that we're currently conducting in the eastern parts of Rafah. I can say that we've been successful so far in dismantling and destroying tunnel shafts that we found, which would be used by the terrorists. And on the second hand, also engaging the enemy on the ground. We've done this, mind you, only after we've conducted an extremely extensive evacuation plan to get people out of harm's way. Some 300,000 people have left the area after we called on them because we wanted to get them out of the war zone.
But both your allies in the UK and the US and many more have said that they don't support your actions in Rafah. So why are you proceeding with them?
So we have to keep in mind what the alternatives are. And I think what is most important is that you wouldn't allow Hamas to be your neighbor with the opportunity just to come into your backyard, abduct children, kill women and men. And this is the alternative. We have to fight Hamas. We have to make sure that they don't have the powers to conduct the atrocities of the 7th of October ever again. They've promised that if they are given the chance to do so, they will. So we are in an effort to dismantle Hamas as a governing authority and bring home the hostages. There are 132 Israelis still being held by Hamas in unbearable conditions. We know about the stories coming out of hostages that have been released or rescued about those conditions. We need to bring home the hostages, and we need to make sure that Hamas never have the power to do what they did ever again.
Okay, well, Hamas have claimed that a British-Israeli hostage, Nadav Popplewell, I beg your pardon, died due to injuries in an Israeli airstrike over a month ago. Has the Israeli military confirmed this death? What do you say to the accusations that it was an Israeli bombardment that killed this hostage?
I'd be very, very cautious about accepting anything that a merciless terrorist organization puts out there on behalf of its propaganda machine in order to exert more pain and to the Israeli public and to try and prevent us from operating against them.
So are you saying that none of the Israeli airstrikes have been responsible for the harm that may have come to any hostages? Can you be certain of that?
Here's what we know. We know that we are conducting our operations taking into full consideration that there may be hostages in and around those areas. Our responsibility is to bring home the hostages as live and as safe as possible. And we have called off operations, special operations, ground operations, in order to protect hostages. This is a challenging reality. The reality of urban warfare, the reality that this enemy, Hamas, has weaponized the civilian arena, unprecedented in the nature of modern warfare, and has been doing so and building these capabilities for the last 17 years, has created a huge challenge. And this is precisely what we're up against, an organization that has become a government that has utilized those powers of government to conduct the most challenging and terrible attack against Israel that we were, I say quite frankly, unprepared for,
Okay.
surprised with, and we need to make sure it can't happen again.
Okay, but you can't say for sure that Israeli airstrikes haven't been responsible for harm that may have come to hostages. I want to move on, Lieutenant Colonel. The US has offered Israeli assistance, including intelligence about the location of Hamas leaders and hidden tunnels, if it holds back on an invasion in Rafah. Will this offer be accepted?
I don't understand. Again, if we are expected not to protect our civilians in a hope that Hamas, a terrorist organization that has lied time and time again, will release hostages, will cease fire. No, Hamas doesn't accept that. This war could be over today. If they ceased fire and released 132 hostages, there would be no need to fight. There would be no need to continue our efforts in Rafah or anywhere else in the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, we know they are not going to raise that white flag. We know they're not going to unconditionally surrender. And unfortunately, we know that they have no intention of releasing the 132 hostages. They could have done it months ago. Okay. We need to make sure that the hostages come home. We need to make sure that Hamas can never wield the power of government or the sword of death above our heads. That's unacceptable. That is what we're up against. And I think what is most important is that we have to realize that Hamas can't be trusted. They literally abducted babies from their bedrooms. Can you really trust somebody like that?
The Biden administration have also suggested that Israel may have violated international law using US weapons in a military campaign in Gaza. Are you worried about losing US support? And what's your reaction to those accusations?
I read quite thoroughly the report. It was also inconclusive that has actually happened. We need to be very accurate. So I would say, first of all, the IDF is conducting its operations in accordance with international humanitarian law and the laws of armed conflict. That is what every soldier goes through in their basic training, and that is the standard of the IDF. Does that mean there can't be mistakes on the battleground? Of course, the notion of the fog of war, where information is not correctly communicated, where the reality on the ground is a state of chaos. These types of things and mistakes can happen on the ground. We take that into account. We're operating in order to minimize mistakes, but absolutely we operate in accordance to the laws of armed conflict. We are up against an enemy that has no regard for any of the laws that you and I hold dearly. I'd say quite the contrary. They abuse that intentionally in order to raise the question of lawfulness. They have absolutely no regard for international humanitarian law or the laws of armed conflict.
Lieutenant Colonel, is this a war that you can win? It's been 219 days since the war started. And on Saturday, your forces in the IDF were quoted as currently striking Hamas terror targets in Jabalia area. That's the far north of the Gaza Strip, if I understand correctly. Now, that area had been cleared before. That area had been gone through by the IDF and cleared. You're going back to it because of evidence of Hamas activity. Is this just a game of whack-a-mole? Is this going to be happening in all areas that you have cleared?
So we have to realize and be very accurate in what we've said. We said when we dismantled Hamas's battalion in the Jabalia area, that is precisely what we've done. But it doesn't mean that there can't be an evolution of the terrorist activities on the ground. And what we've seen over recent weeks is indeed that evolution of shifting from organized combat, where Hamas came in and as military forces on the 7th of October, to individual terrorists at small cells. If you may, it's more like guerrilla warfare, which is a new challenge and a development of the challenge. Of course, the idea is to make sure that Hamas can no longer pose an organized threat. And if we identify that they are reorganizing in a way which threatens us, then of course we will operate against them to destroy their capabilities. But this morning, in the early hours of this morning, a rocket was fired from northern Gaza towards Ashkelon, injuring 3 people in their apartments at 2 a.m. in the morning. We all deserve to be able to sleep safely in our homes, Israelis and Palestinians alike. Unfortunately, we are up against a terrorist organization that has no regard for civilians, Israelis or Palestinian.
There is concern about aid reaching people who are in dire need of it in all areas of Gaza, particularly in Rafah, and particularly in the areas that citizens, 300,000 you mentioned, have been urged to relocate to. Andrew Mitchell, Foreign Office Minister, this morning was telling Kate and Adam on Times Radio that Israel must do everything it can to get aid to the right places. What are you doing to make sure that innocent people have the aid that they need?
We are working with international partners in order to conduct a humanitarian operation in parallel to the
But all of them are saying that it's not enough, Lieutenant Colonel. All of them are saying that there is a humanitarian crisis going on at the moment. So it must be that that aid is not getting to the right people. Why is that?
There is no war in modern history that there isn't result of that there isn't a humanitarian crisis, because war is a state of perpetual humanitarian crisis in any case. We need to operate, and we are operating. As I mentioned, we open new crossings, ensure with the World Food Programme this morning that more trucks go in. We facilitate and support. Just yesterday, we made sure that 200,000 liters of fuel went into the Gaza Strip to precisely run the humanitarian effort, the hospitals, the power, the water pumps, the power systems, so that some good supplies can actually happen on the ground. Of course, this is a huge challenge in a war zone, which is challenged constantly by Hamas that are hiding specifically behind the civilians. I will share with you that we are looking and seeing even abuse of armed gunmen in some of the UN facilities. So this is something, this is of serious concern, and and here's something we need to take into consideration. Hamas are continuing to siphon off supplies, humanitarian supplies, on one hand. And we've also seen that they're launching rockets from humanitarian zones intentionally to put people in harm's way. We need to work together with the international humanitarian organizations. And I maintain that is precisely what we're doing in trying to alleviate some of the difficulties of war. And that is why, while Hamas is trying to exasperate the situation of the civilians of Gaza, the pain of the people of Gaza does not serve an Israeli interest. It only serves Hamas's interest. And together with the international humanitarian organizations, we need to work in order to alleviate the difficulties of war.
I understood your point. How many Hamas fighters have you killed?
Our assessment suggests that around 14,000 terrorists have been killed in exchange of in combat or precision strikes against those terrorists.
How many civilians have lost their lives?
Too many. Every single civilian lost.
Have you got a number?
Is too many. And of course, I would maintain that nobody has a number today.
Well, the Palestinian Health Authority say that just over 35,000 have lost their lives so far. Do you have a number? Hamas
Health Ministry?
Yes, that is from the Health Ministry, Palestinian, the Hamas Health Ministry. But that is a number. Do you have a different number?
So the most updated number that the Hamas Health Ministry has released is actually 21,000 confirmed names. So I think we need to be very, very cautious of throwing around numbers which are inaccurate.
Do you have a number?
Serve a specific. Let's talk about the numbers issue. I think it's really important, and I understand.
That's why I'm asking you. Do you have a number?
I think first of all, as I said, the civilians are paying too much of a heavy price of this war. Every single civilian killed in this war is a tragedy, an individual, for the family, for society, and also for the future of the relations between Israel and the Gaza Strip. And I would maintain that we need to be very cautious about accepting what Hamas is telling us. I can say that the number
I totally understand that. Lieutenant Colonel, I'm sorry for interrupting. I absolutely understand your concerns about accepting a figure from the Palestinian Health Authority. That's why I'm asking you. You seem to have a very precise number of how many Hamas fighters you've been able to kill. 14,000, you told me. So it must be possible to take account of the people who are losing their lives in this conflict. I'm asking you for that number for innocent civilians, and you don't seem to be you're telling me why a number is important, but am I correct in saying that the IDF don't have a number, or at least you don't want to say a number out loud?
No, I would say that first of all, the IDF does not target civilians, and therefore we are not following civilians, because we are following the targets that we are specifically trying to take out of this war, take out of the equation. Of course, there is tragedies that are happening in the course of the war. It's the nature of warfare since the dawn of war is that civilians have always been caught up in it. There are professionals around the world from West Point to Sandhurst that are saying that the IDF is conducting today combat in unprecedented circumstances in a way that no other military can actually succeed. But I don't want to celebrate that because I want to mourn every.
But we can quantify that. But we can quantify that, Lieutenant Colonel, by giving a number out and saying, look, for the 219 days, this is the amount. And as you said, every innocent death of a civilian is a tragic event. So why can't we quantify that by actually being able to put a rough number to how many people have lost their life so far?
Because as Hamas don't know and put out a number based on an estimate or social media accounts, I can say that the IDF does not count civilian deaths. Okay. We're not targeting the civilians. We are targeting the enemy. And I think that what is most important in this is that we get over from the war and try and build a sense of security for Israelis and Palestinians alike. We need to bring home the hostages, and we need to make sure that Hamas never wield that power against Israel ever again. That way, we can get back to some sort of normal situation.
Okay, I appreciate you've made that point, and you've been incredibly generous with your time, and I thank you for that. One last question. Why are you not allowing journalists in Gaza? And therefore, you and I would not have to have this argument about how many civilians have lost their lives, because journalists will be able to be on the ground, look at facts from both sides, and give some sort of vision of what's going on without having to take one side or another. Why have the IDF not allowed any journalists into Gaza?
Arguably, this is the most televised war in the world. Over the last 7 months, there is no lack of reporting from the Gaza Strip.
But there are still no international journalists allowed in Gaza.
Based on international organizations, based on local journalists, and we both know that there is a severe challenge in reporting out of Gaza. The area is a war zone, and therefore it is not safe.
But that's what war journalists do, Lieutenant Colonel. They go into war zones, they report. That's what they've been doing in Ukraine.
This was challenged by the Foreign Press Association against our court, and the courts determined that there is absolutely no need for Israel to permit the access from Israel into the Gaza Strip of journalists. And while we are doing and I would say bringing journalists, and I absolutely get what you're asking. The situation on the ground is very unstable. It is a situation of war, and therefore, from our perspective, the journalists will not go in at this time until there is a different decision and until the situation changes.